All right, here we go. Well, good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to present to you the 2022 propositions and to give you my best attempt at an unbiased look at what each of the 7 state propositions, 2 county propositions, and then the 2 local city propositions have to say. My name is James Verhoeven, for those of you who don't know, and I've grown up here in this town, in this church, and for the last 32 years I've been a history teacher and have always been a student of politics, and so very much enjoy being able to do this research and then to be able to share it and hopefully make some of you feel more empowered in the vote that you're going to be casting on Tuesday, November the 8th. Before we begin, I'd like to have a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight and we beseech you for your wisdom, Lord. We need your guidance. You have entrusted us this republic. You've entrusted to us the responsibility of it. And as stewards of this earth, including this government, Lord, it's our responsibility to vote. It's our responsibility to vote wisely. And so I ask that tonight, through me, you would work to help the people here be able to do that better, Lord. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right, so the first one, we'll just be going in numerical order for those of you who brought your information that was mailed to you, is Proposition 1. It is called the Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment. Notice the wording is important. This is a constitutional amendment that is being proposed for the California State Constitution. What it would do, as the name implies, is it would establish a right to reproductive freedom, which has been defined to include a right to an abortion and to choose or refuse contraceptives. The language is actually very, very short, which is kind of ironic when you look at so many of the propositions that go on for pages and pages. This one is just a few sentences. Indulge me. The state shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives. Now, as many of you may be aware, currently in the state of California, abortion is legal, and it is legal up to fetal viability or after viability if the procedure is necessary to protect the life or the health of the mother. We have had further legislative acts that have established a fundamental right to choose to bear a child or to choose to obtain an abortion. So what this proposition is doing is simply taking the laws that we currently have in the state of California and asking you, the voters, to move it from a statute, a law, into the Constitution. By moving it into the state constitution, it is seen as a further protection of that right. And in light of the Supreme Court's decision, in light of our national debate, that is the step that California wants to take to try to protect it. Whenever we look at proposed legislation that we are to vote on, one of the areas that I like to share with you, because I think it's crucial to give us some input, is to look at who supports or is in favor of the legislation or who opposes it. So on each of these, I will be reading to you some of the names, and sometimes you get some very logical lineup like you will in this one. Some of them we're going to go through. You're going to find some very strange alliances have been formed. In this one, I should say also there is no expected financial impact from this because it doesn't change any state revenues. Support is coming from Gavin Newsom, from both of our U.S. Senators, Dianne Feinstein and Alex Padilla, Planned Parenthood, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the California Medical Association. Opposition is being led by a coalition called California Together, another called No on Proposition 1. There are some former U.S. representatives who have done so. The California Republican Party, the California Conference on Catholic Bishops, and Democrats for Life of America, and finally the Knights of Columbus have opposed this. This one's a pretty straightforward political, philosophical vote. If you believe that abortion is a right that should be protected, you would want to vote yes. If you believe that abortion is not a fundamental right, you should vote no. And that's about as straightforward as it gets for this one. It's not a lot of gray area in between. Any questions on Proposition 1? Good. All right. I wasn't sure where I'd go with answers for that one. Let's go to Proposition 26. Now, 26 and 27 are kind of fascinating. If you guys have noticed, in the last couple of years, we tend to get two propositions that look very similar, and it's because they're from competing interests who are trying to angle for an advantage for them. So Proposition 26 is called Legalize Sports Betting on American Indian Lands Initiative. And what Proposition 26 would do is legalize sports betting at American Indian gaming casinos and licensed racetracks in California. The law says, or the proposed law would say, that if you are 21 and older, you could bet on professional sports, college sports, or amateur sports, with the exception of high school sports. And the other exception is if a California college team is participating, you cannot bet. They would also, through this legislation, put a 10% tax on the profits from sports betting at the racetracks, and the state government would distribute these revenues in three areas. 15% of the revenues would go for the California Department of Health, and they would be researching gambling addiction. 15% would go to the Bureau of Gambling Control for their enforcement over this, and the other 70% would go to the general fund. Now, obviously, there is a financial impact, but interestingly, the analysts say that this is going to be a financially neutral proposition. The belief is that it will generate tens of millions of dollars, and it will cost tens of millions of dollars to enforce it. And so the money that comes in will be spent in that enforcement. The proposition is being supported by several of our Native American tribes. That includes the Pechanga, the Agua Caliente, and several others that have all been for it. Those who are against it, you can kind of guess when I say some of the names. If you're not familiar, we'll go through it. But those who are against it is a group called the California Commerce Club, which happen to run legalized casinos, which would not benefit from this. The Hawaiian Gardens Casino, who would not benefit from this. And Knighted Ventures, which is a corporation that has casinos. So the main opposition is from the group that we're going to be talking about in a moment, who sponsored Proposition 27. So you've got two sides. Now, obviously, fundamentally, there's an issue here still. What is your position on gambling? Obviously, if your position is that the state of California should do less to support the idea of gambling, then it doesn't matter which proposition, you're going to lean towards a no vote. If you believe that the state of California has already embraced to some degree gambling, and if we're going to continue down that road, then you're faced with the decision of, do you believe either of these are valid? And if so, which one? So 26 is the one that would restrict it to predominantly just Native American casinos, and it is a cash neutral proposition. Before I ask for questions, I'm going to show you the next proposition, and then together we'll kind of weigh them and answer questions. The next one is Proposition 27. Proposition 27 is the Legalized Sports Betting and Revenue for Homeless Prevention Fund Initiative. I love the names some of these come up with. So here we've got Proposition 27 directly in competition with Proposition 26. Now, Proposition 27 also goes a little step further because it's not just a new state law that they're asking to create. There would actually be a constitutional amendment guaranteeing this right. And what it would do is it would authorize either Native American tribes that have gaming on the tribe or online sports betting platforms that work with a gaming tribe to operate online sports betting operations. Again, the requirements would be that you have to be 21 years of age or older, and there would be a ban on betting on youth sports. Those two pieces are very similar. This law would also create the Division of Online Sports Betting Control, and it would be the watchdog over this. It would create a trust fund from licensing fees, renewals, and the tax on sports wagering. After, and this is a key phrase, after operating costs are deducted for those who run these organizations, 85% of the remaining revenue would be allocated to this soon-to-be created California Solutions to Homelessness and Mental Health Support. And what they would be doing is creating permanent and interim housing. Now, the remaining 15% would be directed to the Tribal Economic Development Account to fund expansion of tribal government's public health, education, infrastructure, and economic development. So let me slow down for a moment. 100% of the revenues will first have all operating expenses taken out by those who are running it. Then whatever's left will be divided, as we said, 85% to the first, 15% to the second. Now, the fiscal impact has been analyzed, and it is expected that we would see state revenues potentially reaching the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually from this. There would be an offset of tens of millions annually for the enforcement and regulatory costs. And this proposal is being supported by a company called MGM, which you might be familiar with, FanDuel Sportsbook, and another one called Crown Gaming, which is more commonly known as DraftKings. So all of these are established gaming, betting forums who are wanting to be able to come into California and tap into our betting market. Those who opposed Proposition 27 include the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, the Pechanga Band of Indians, as well as, and here's an interesting bedfellow, both the California Democratic Party and the California Republican Party. So you've got some very interesting alliances that have taken shape. So again, you've got two different possibilities. If you think the idea of gambling is just wrong, then you would bet. Isn't that ironic? We do have a little bookie over here. What we would then say is you'd vote no on either of them. If you believe the idea is a valid one and you think the state of California should embrace it, then you've got to choose again. 26 would focus on Native American tribes only. 27 would allow outside companies to come in utilizing Native American tribes and set up the betting that way. Questions? I'll offer you 10-to-1 odds that I know the answer. I learned that in algebra, Mr. Vanderkoy. You taught me well for that. Mr. Vanderkoy would bring out the bookie sheets from the racetracks. Go ahead, Kurt.
Okay, so the ad for 27 shows kids on their cell phones that they can, like, how are they going to regulate that?
What usually you would have to do, as I understand it, is you have to create, because this is going to be backed by the biggies, DraftKings and so forth. So you'd have to create an account, and in creating that account, there would be age verification, as valid as you may or may not believe age verification on the internet is. That would be part of the regulation. Any other questions? Dr. Elgersma. Yes.
Was there any in your research analysis of other states that have passed similar sort of propositions, impact in those states?
I didn't look too deeply into the impact. It hasn't been as studied, but yes, there are a number of states. We are kind of one of the last bastions holding out, hence why you see some of the bigger heavy hitters coming on board with 27. With the largest population in the nation, this is seen as a very fertile market. So we know that's why they're interested. It's very split on the opinion as to whether it's benefited or not. Obviously, the companies who are backing it, if you look at their stock performances, have done very well each time a state is added to the fold, which can give you some surface evidence at least. Any other questions on 26 or 27? Yeah, the cost analysis for this one is that we would potentially have mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually coming into the state But remember, 100% of the profits goes to those two pieces. 85% studying the homelessness issue, 15% going to the tribal economic development account. So there would be no income per se to the state, except that the state runs the first account, this 85% account. No, because that one doesn't affect us as voters, because remember, they get to take out their operating expenses before. Oh, in that sense, yes. Yeah. Very, very populated state. Lots of people who want to gamble. So. Any others? 26, 27? I feel like I'm at the Holland Festival. Raise your paddles, bid. All right, let's move on to Proposition 28, the Art and Music K-12 Education Funding Initiative. Proposition 28 would require K-12 public schools to fund arts education programs at a minimum of 1% of their last year Prop 98 annual funding. Let me go back in time for you real quickly. Proposition 98 was passed, almost a decade ago now. Proposition 98 guarantees that a set amount of funding goes to the public schools. So they're using that as their baseline and they're using the last year because the way funding works is it's based on the attendance at a school. So by looking at last year's, those numbers have already been submitted and those numbers have been verified by the state. So instead of having any flexibility in terms of, oh, we think we're going to get this much because our attendance has been, and then all of a sudden the attendance goes down, they base it on the last year so that those numbers are already solid. So again, it would establish a 1% of their last year Prop 98 annual funding. Now this funding is in addition to their guaranteed Prop 98 funding. It's not a redistribution of allocation, it's an additional allocation. A large coalition has come together to support this, and very few have stood out against this. One of the supporters, and I'm just going to quote to you, so please, this is not my words, these are not my words, these are the words of the supporters. Only 1 in 5 public schools in California has a dedicated teacher for traditional arts programs like music, dance, theater, art, or even newer forms of creative expression like computer graphics, animation, coding, costume design, and filmmaking. This initiative is timely as our country seeks to create a more just and equitable future for all children. A boost in arts and music education will help ensure the future workforce in media and technology properly reflect the diversity of the children in our public schools, end quote. So this legislation would affect schools with 500 or more students in that they would have to agree to spend 80% of that 1% only on employing teachers in this work. So most school districts in any that you can think of in our area all have more than 500 students. So again, 80% of the funding has to go to paying teachers to be in the classroom to teach this different topics. The fiscal impact is large. It is likely in the range of somewhere between $800 million to $1 billion annually beginning in 23-24. There are, there are very few who have come out and against it. The supporters are the Californians for Art and Music Education in Public Schools, the Superintendent of Los Angeles, Austin Bettner, the U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, the Democratic Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Universal Music Group, the California Teacher Association, the California Dance Education Association, the California Educational Theater Association, LA Unified School District, Steve Ballmer, who's the former CEO of Microsoft. A whole list of folks have signed up as being for it. And then when I slide down to opposition, there's one, Reform California. That is all who has filed arguments against it. And on the official arguments, nobody has filed any paperwork against Proposition 28. So that summarizes it, I think, pretty straightly. Questions? Don Bierman.
Where does the funding come from?
The state of California's general fund. Yeah, our taxes. Yeah, okay. Mr. Vanderkoy.
Do you say it's intended to benefit all students?
In public K-12 schools. Yeah. Yeah, it's not for the community college, the UCs, or the Cal States. This is designed to build those skills in the students from kindergarten through high school so that they're better able to advance into those other programs. Yeah, not with state funding. Not in California. Oh, yes, absolutely. So the first question had been, where's the funding coming from? And the second one is, who benefits from this, or where's that money going to go to? And so the question of where's the money going to go to, it's all public schools in the state of California that run a K through 12 program or any part in between. So if you're in elementary school, middle school, high school. Any others? And I do want to say, because I know Scott's going to text me later otherwise, even though I am a member of the California Teachers Association, I did not have any influence on saying yes or no to the endorsement of this, and I'm not trying to encourage or discourage you in either way. Again, this is totally neutral, whatever your feelings are on it, but I should be clear up front.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. All right. Proposition 29, a blast from the past. Here we go again. So as I start typing this, I'm like, stop me if you've heard this before, because you have. In 2020, when we were in here 2 years ago doing this, it was called Proposition 23. Before that, in 2018, it was called Proposition 8. Now, it's back again, Proposition 29. And what this proposition would do, it's called the Dialysis Clinic Requirements Initiative, is that it would enact staffing requirements, reporting requirements, ownership disclosures, and closing requirements for chronic dialysis clinics. So this one gets a little complicated. If you've watched the commercials, the folks who are against it have put out some very powerful appearing ads to say this would be a disastrous thing. Again, I'll leave it up to you if you decide that it is. What the law calls for, and hasn't each time previously, and has been obviously defeated each time previously, is that if you run a dialysis clinic, and right now in the state of California there are hundreds, those hundreds are all run by 2 corporations for 97% of those different dialysis clinics. Those clinics, under the proposed law, must have at least 1 physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant on site during patient treatment time and have 6 months of experience. That is what they are proposing. That's the staffing requirement. Another one is that the clinic must report dialysis-related infections to the California Department of Public Health. A third requirement is that clinics must provide patients with a list of physicians with an ownership interest of 5% or more in that clinic. A fourth is clinics must provide to the California Department of Public Health a list of owners with 5% ownership or greater. And then finally, clinics must obtain the California Department of Public Health's written consent before they are allowed to close or substantially reduce their services. So this is a piece of legislation that is being put out to try to, according to the authors, strengthen the ability and availability of dialysis clinics to meet patient needs. This law has been, as I said before, proposed several times, has been rejected each time by the state and by us as voters. It is supported by Californians for Kidney Dialysis Patient Protection, and then the SEIUUHW, which is United Health Workers. So it's an HMO program that is trying to create this. And they argue, these 2 main proponents, that the two companies who own the vast majority of these clinics make a huge profit, but they make that profit on the cost of the patients not always getting their proper care. Now, as you can guess, it is opposed by those two companies. One of them is called DaVita, and the other is called Fresenius. It is also opposed, Proposition 29, by the Republican Party, the California Chamber of Commerce, and the California Medical Association. The overall fiscal impact is relatively low when you deal with a state budget. It is expected to be in the low tens of millions because there would obviously be some increased government costs to make sure that these regulations are being followed by the clinics. So take your side. It's been proposed twice. We, the voters, have said no twice. It's back again. The companies who are making lots of money off of it are saying this is unnecessary. The healthcare company on the other side keeps saying we want it. And so it's back up to us to decide if we think it's necessary or not necessary. Questions on a fairly detailed proposition?
Is there any thought or study on what effect this will have on the number of dialysis clinics that will stay open?
Yes. The question is, does this have an impact on the number that will stay open, or is it projected? And it totally depends who you ask on which side of the debate. So I'll give you two answers. The folks who are for this will say no, it won't have a significant impact because the two companies who run these are making so much money, they'll simply have to adjust to these new laws. They might make a little less money, but not to that point. So that would be the side for those who support the legislation. If you're on the owner side, they would say that's exactly what we fear. We're a business, we're going to consolidate, and we're going to make sure that we can continue to make a profit. Now, do remember, one of the pieces of the legislation says that a company cannot close without California Department of Public Health certification. And one of the things, if you dig deeper into the proposed legislation, is the California Department of Public Health has a chance to go through the books. So the company would have to have some sort of a fiscal impact to say why they need to close down that business, or that branch of their business at least. So you've got increased government regulation on a business, but it's a business that is vital for folks to survive. But you also have a healthcare on the other side who's trying to keep healthcare clinics open because that's their longevity and their livelihood too. So you've got two very opposite competing interests, and so who you ask would have a very big impact on the answer that you would get. Yep, I got one here and then one there. Again, the pro side who's proposing the legislation says in the end it won't, because these companies are making too much money off of it. They're raising a huge ballyboo now, but when push comes to shove, they're making enough money. They're not going to change. The costs are already controlled by insurance companies, so there's not going to be an increase in out-of-pocket projected. But obviously the other side would say, oh, that's not so guaranteed. We may have to reduce different shifts and reduce different operations in order to keep our profits where they are. So unfortunately, unless we can create that parallel universe and run it and see, you've got two diametrically opposed answers, and we have no comparison to say for sure which one's the correct answer. Question number two.
I just read that this is the third time that the labor union is trying to get in on this because of the profit that the individual clinics are making. And so that's why this is the third time that
Correct.
the unions are trying to get involved.
Yes. Yeah, so that's why I said when I started out, 2018 it was Proposition 8, 2020 it was Proposition 23, now it's Proposition 29. The language has, I didn't read them all the way through, but if they're not identical, they're pretty darn close to identical. And yeah, as I shared, it's a healthcare organization who's proposing it, which obviously means they would benefit, because remember, they're guaranteeing that if a clinic is open and treating patients, you have to have either a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant with 6 months of experience working. That's their benefit. Now, they would also argue that that's going to benefit the patients. On the other side is the business who's looking to make sure they can keep their profits up, who say, I don't want to have those increased costs, and so they're fighting against it. So those are the two basic pieces you've got to weigh to decide which is more important. Other questions? I didn't repeat that one. Sorry, Rick. I'll keep working on it. Any others? All right. Proposition 30. Whew, this is one I'm very worried about, as I make millions of dollars. Proposition 30 is a tax on income above $2 million, and this would be for zero-emission vehicles and wildlife prevention. Proposition 30 would increase the income tax by an additional 1.75% on income above $2 million. Currently, that rate, for those of you who aren't at the $2 million income a year level, that rate is currently at 13.3%. So with the increase, it would go to 15.05%. It is a temporary tax, and it would, temporary is a very loosely defined term, because it will expire on January the 1st, 2043. It's a little bit after my retirement. Now, it could expire sooner. I'll try not to get too convoluted here, but it would expire on January 1st after 3 consecutive calendar years where the statewide emissions have been reduced by 80% from what they were in 1990. So we'll always be measuring our California emissions, and if for 3 calendar years in a row, those emissions are 80% less than they were in 1990, then the thought is this tax has done its job, it recesses. If we don't ever hit 3 years in a row, then this tax would automatically expire on January 1st, 2043. Before I go further, I just want to make sure, is everybody clear on the 2 different expirations? All right. The money from this tax increase would go to clean cars and the Clean Air Trust Fund, where it would be divided into 3 different sub-funds. One of them has to do with infrastructure for electric vehicles. One of them has to do with clean mobility and zero-emission vehicles. And then the last one is the Wildlife Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Fund. So all of these funds are for zero-emission vehicles, charging stations, infrastructure, as well as hiring and training firefighters. So the money that's going to come in is going to be divided by percentages between those 3 different accounts. And if you'd like, I can go over the percentages for each one too. Fiscal impact, as you can guess, is going to be high. The fiscal impact is expected each year to generate between $3 billion and $4.5 billion for the state of California. Now, there would be some offsetting because there would be some increased state administrative costs. There could be a decrease in state and local transportation revenue. And so the range of the offset is anywhere from tens of millions, potentially into the low hundreds of millions, against an expected income of, again, $3 to $4.5 billion. Now, as I told you, we always want to look at who's supporting it, because we get some very strange connections in this one again. For example, Proposition 30 is being supported by the ride-sharing company Lyft, the California Democratic Party, and a number of U.S. reps and state representatives. The opposition is interestingly unique as well. Remember, the Democratic Party supports it. Democratic Governor Newsom is against it, and he's allied with the Republican Party in being against it. The California Teachers Association is opposed to it, as is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, not 2 groups that generally get together for drinks. Here are 2 quotes, one for, one against, both of them by Democrats. The first one is State Representative Kevin McCarty, who says, Our air quality is the worst in the nation and among the worst in the world, and our consecutive years of devastating wildfires are poisoning our air, threatening lives, and exhausting our brave firefighters. With Proposition 30, we have the opportunity to reduce air pollution, curb climate change, and build a bold, long-range plan to fund both our acceleration to EVs and firefighting resources. So that's Democratic Representative Kevin McCarty. On the opposing side is Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who says, and I quote from him, "Proposition 30 is a special interest carve-out, a cynical scheme devised by a single corporation to funnel state income tax revenue to their company. Californians should know that just this year, our state committed $10 billion for electric vehicles and their infrastructure." If you got a coin, you can flip it, because this one's an interesting side piece to it. You know, as you know, in our political environment, we've had lots and lots of talk in the last 10 to 15 years of tax the rich. So we have an initiative from the people to tax the rich. Now, when you tax the rich, you're going to generate money. Where does it go? The feeling is we need to continue to support the idea of electric vehicles and their infrastructure to make it happen, and the firefighters. So that's what the proponents are trying to do. The opponents say no. Now, you heard Gavin Newsom, or you heard me say what Gavin Newsom said, where it's a cynical scheme by a single corporation. He's referring to Lyft. Lyft, as you guys know, is one of the competitors to Uber. Lyft has come out and said they are going to try to do everything they can to encourage all of their drivers to be driving electric vehicles, hence why people are saying this is for them. I did do a little bit of research on that. I will say, in Lyft's behalf, they actually supported this before they had made that commitment. Now, could it be that they made this commitment knowing they were about to do that? Obviously, we can all scheme and wonder and propose, but that is the basic idea behind this. We're going to generate lots of money, and the money is going to go to support electric vehicles and training firefighters. Questions? It is not all of their income that'll be taxed. It is the amount over $2 million. So everything under $2 million will stay at 13.3%, and then any amount above and beyond $2 million will go to the 15.05%.
Yeah, would that include capital gains?
Anything that is considered income by the state of California now would still be, none of those tax codes would change. So it's simply a dollars and cents figure. Yep. Yeah, Rick.
Just briefly reading this, it doesn't appear that there will be a lot of money for private individuals buying electric cars. Did you do any, it looks like most of it would go to corporations.
There's some interpretability of that because those sub-funds that it's going to have some leeway as to how they would use that to help encourage the use of electric vehicles. So I can't say it won't go to that. It could go to that, but there's nothing that dictates that it has to go to that. Does that? Okay, good. You're right, Mr. Burkumpus. Words count, don't they? The meaning changes very quickly as you start to read through those pieces. Yeah.
What kind of infrastructure are they going to do?
The biggest one that appears to be supported by this is simply charging stations. You know, the big knock right now is if my wife and I want to go drive to Iowa, for example, bad example because this is only in California, but you get the idea, is that you can only go so far and then you got to charge up, and what if there's not a charging station? And so we want to have more charging stations to allow people to have a greater range with their electric vehicles to make them more usable by the general public wherever they're going to go. That is not addressed in this. That is a background issue that the proposition does not give us. Could it be used for that? Yes, it could. But that, yeah, there's no language, again, that specifically says that's what we'll do.
There is a significant participation that part of the infrastructure will also be OV-only lanes that
Yeah. Yeah. Anything again and that's why again the incentives could be for individuals to buy, because again what the ideal goal coming from this is that we create scenarios that encourage people as much as possible to utilize electric vehicles. Now we can have lots of debates on if that's a good goal or not a good goal, but that's the motive that's pushing this idea. All right. No other questions? All right. Let's go to Proposition 31. Proposition 31, the last of our state propositions, is the flavored tobacco products ban referendum. All right, now we get to some Chapter 5 review from U.S. history. You guys all know what a referendum is, right, Debbie? Yeah. Remember fighting Bob Lafayette from Wisconsin, right? Created initiatives and referendums and recalls. So a referendum is the ability of the state to take a possible idea and say, we don't want to do our job. No, that's not the way they'd say it. We want to make sure the people support this. And so they are taking a bill that has passed and it is being placed to the people for the people to say yes or no to. So here's what the bill says. In August of 2020, the Senate passed Senate Bill 793, which would ban the sale of flavored tobacco products and tobacco flavor enhancers. For all of you who are worried, hookah tobacco, loose leaf tobacco, and premium cigars are exempt from this. So if you've got those Cubans, you're okay, unless the IRS finds out, because now you've got an issue. So we're really dealing with, predominantly we're dealing with the vape industry, is what this one was originally given towards. A yes vote says we like this legislation and we want the legislation to move forward. A no vote would repeal it and say this legislation will not go into effect. And the big idea behind the legislation is trying to stop the tobacco companies from using fruit flavors and candy flavors, which obviously are alluring and that the tobacco industry wants to use to bring in new users. Now, here we've got some interesting, really political philosophy going on in a very unique topic of tobacco. Proposition 31 is supported by Gavin Newsom and the California Teacher Association. And here's Gavin Newsom's quote of why we should support this. Big tobacco has been targeting our kids, trying to hook our kids on tobacco products, killing literally a generation. It's time for us to stand up and protect our kids and to push back against big tobacco. That would be the argument of why we should support this idea. Now, those against it include the Republican Party of California, shocker, Philip Morris, another shocker, R.J. Reynolds, and then finally another one that's not as well known, but ITG Brands. Now, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is also opposed to this, and the president, a guy named John Koupel, has a quote to argue the other side. And this is where it gets a little philosophical. He says, although the law bans the sale of flavored tobacco products to all customers regardless of age, lawmakers named it the Stop Tobacco Access to Kids Enforcement Act. They claimed it was needed to stop underage tobacco use because only kids apparently like flavor. To be sure, no one wants children smoking or vaping, but it's already illegal in California to sell or give tobacco and vapor products to anyone under the age of 21, end quote. There's no fiscal impact that is anticipated from this. It really comes down to a philosophical position of either you believe that the idea of tobacco and luring kids in is a bad thing and we should get rid of it. That's the argument of Gavin Newsom. John Koupel's argument on the other side is, this is outside government's purview. Businesses should be able to do what businesses want to do. We've already said it's illegal for kids. This is simply government overreach. Where you stand is where you will cast your vote on November the 8th. What do you have in terms of questions for Proposition 31? Yes?
If you say no on this and it gets repealed, does that mean that it's still illegal for under 21?
Yes. Nothing changes that.
Only for the adults.
And this is simply banning those flavors. So if you're 86 years old and you like bubblegum flavored vape, this would not allow you to do that if you voted yes.
It's not going to take away the law from 2020 where they said kids cannot.
No matter what, it'll be illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to have or to purchase cigarettes, tobacco. That part is not up at all. It's simply the idea of flavors. Worried, Mr. Vanderkooy? Oh, those grape cigarettes may be gone. Any other questions on Proposition 31? The IRS did not hear that. All right, let's go to some state issues then, county issues, going away from the state to the county. So as you may know, there are two San Bernardino County measures, and they are fascinating, and I am going to do my best to stay as neutral as I can with these. But again, welcome to Redo. So 2 years ago in 2020, the voters in San Bernardino County passed a law called Measure K. Measure K did some very interesting things. It was brought to court. The courts have thrown it out. And so the County Board of Supervisors is now bringing back Proposition D to try to fix what K was doing. If that didn't confuse you, let me jump into it. So San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors is asking our voters to rescind what was approved in 2020. And that was, it would limit supervisors to 1 term, it would restrict their pay, and there's a couple details that will come out a little bit later. Those are the 2 biggies. Now, again, the supervisors took this measure to court. The court ruled that Measure K is unconstitutional and that it has to be changed. Now, how that change happens is where you get some political debate. We could reject Measure D, and then the change will happen through the court process. The San Bernardino County Supervisors are saying instead of us taking that long, potentially expensive trail, they're coming up with their own solution, and if we, the voters, support it, it would then supersede K, and we would move forward, and that court case would potentially expire. What are the changes that they want? Some of the changes are that before any tax increase can be imposed by the county, it must be both passed by the Board of Supervisors, and it must be a supermajority, a 4/5 vote, and by the ballot in the next statewide election. So if the San Bernardino County wants to raise taxes, Board of Supervisors has to vote for it, 4/5, and the voters of San Bernardino County have to go for it. That's one of the pieces to Measure D. The second one is it changes the timing for the limit on supervisors serving 3 4-year terms. Let me explain that one. So Proposition K, remember, reduced them to 1 term. Before Proposition K, they could serve 3 terms. Proposition K, as you guys know, most terms are staggered, so you don't have the whole board go off at one time. This is simply technical language to keep staggering, but keeping the 4-year terms, not going to the 1-year term. Is that clear? I could go over all the dates with you, but I just thought that would make it more muddled. So that's the second change. First one, limiting how fast a tax increase can happen. Second is allowing the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors to have 4-year terms again, but they would be staggered terms. Number 3, an increase in salary for the Board of Supervisors can only happen after an election for any Board of Supervisor. If you guys, I could go on to a nice little topic. Do we have time for a little side story? can I embarrass Scott because he always likes to call me out? Scott, what amendment to the United States Constitution is the longest between being voted for approval and being ratified? I love this story because it's so fun for academics. Amendment 27. You guys remember the first 10 amendments called the Bill of Rights? Did you know there was actually 12 that were proposed? There were 12 that were proposed, but only 10 got enough votes from the states to be approved into the Constitution, so they became our Bill of Rights. The 11th one, written by our good friend James Madison, said nobody should get a pay raise unless they've survived an election after they vote for the pay raise. That one didn't get approved. Oh, I gotta take somebody's cell phone away. See me after class. And so, that one had been approved by both houses of Congress, but not by enough states. And way back in the 1990s, some goofy history teacher, constitutional expert, not me, researched it and went, holy cow, there is nothing in this amendment that says it's expired. It's still good. And that was when we were going through, Congress had a history of right after they had been potentially been elected or voted out. Remember in November, in December, they would quick give themselves a massive pay raise, make it retroactive for the last 2 years. And so if they had been voted out, they walked out with a huge check. And you and I, the voters, were going, hey, doggone it, nobody else in the world gets to do that. And so this constitutional expert went, hey, we could prevent it, it's right here. And so that's when we ratified. Proposed in 1789, approved in like 1990. Isn't that crazy? They're just simply taking that same logic and applying it to the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors. You want a pay raise? Vote for it. But it doesn't take effect until there's been an election where the people can have their say by not voting you in office. Does that make sense? All right, long story, I know, but it's kind of a fun story, I think. And that's all that matters because I've got the microphone. Number 4. No, that was it. Those are the 3 things. That's it. So those are the things that the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors would like you to support with Measure D. It does also, they can't just vote any pay raise. I didn't want to go into too much detail. The San Bernardino County Charter, which is like the constitution of the county, limits their pay. They can only get 80% of what the top judge in the county makes. So if the judges get a pay raise, then potentially they could ask for a pay raise, but that won't take effect till after the next election. So just so you know, it's not like they could say, oh, let's pay ourselves $10 million a year. There is a limit already in the Constitution as to how much, or the charter, as to how much they can get. So if Measure D is approved by the voters, this would replace Measure K, which was approved by the voters in 2020, but found unconstitutional. I might have lost you on this one. Are we good? Do we have questions? By the way, somebody asked me later, after we stop recording, we'll hold the second session where I'll just tell you how to vote on each of these. You're welcome. Any questions on Measure D? All good? All right. Measure double E. I love this one. I'm going to vote for it. Oh, I'm not supposed to tell you that, just because it has a great provision in it. So Measure EE is the reception of equitable share of state funding and resources. Again, this comes from the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors, and they believe that San Bernardino County is not getting all of the funds that it should get from the state of California. So what they're doing is they are asking you and I, the voters who live in San Bernardino County, to authorize them, the County Board of Supervisors, to explore all possible paths for full funding, including the possibility that we secede from the state of California and become the state of Verhoeven. Potentially. So that is what they're asking. Now, here's the history behind this one. The Ventura area had some issues with their funding, and they went through a similar process. It was successful for them. They were able from the state to gather more funding. San Bernardino County saw that and went, well, wait, if it worked for them, Maybe we ought to try it. So all this is doing is authorizing the Board of Supervisors to potentially pursue some of these possibilities. The charter doesn't allow them to do it on its own. We, the voters, have to give them the authority to do that. This is only an advisory vote. This is not a compelling vote. So we're not telling them they have to pursue anything. We're simply opening the door to say, if you guys want to do this, you can. Questions on EE? Yeah. There is the state doesn't have, the county doesn't have the same resources as the state, so there's no analysis on that. And because this one, and just looking at it myself, they don't have to do anything, so it would cost zero. They could allocate a number of their personnel to do work, which would be an untold cost. So it's such a wide variable, there is no analysis and there's no real projection on that. No. At minimum, it's going to be personnel cost. So if we're all county employees and I direct you to do some research on this, you're now doing that instead of what you were doing, so that's going to be potentially lost cost. The hope being, whatever I'm having you research will get us funds in exchange for that greater than what it cost you to do the research. I remember how to spell assume. Mr. Bercumpus taught me that one without using any naughty words. Yeah. Guaranteed there will be consultants because that's how bureaucracies work. Yeah. There'll always be a cost. But what it is, no projection on that. It's just saying, we're saying it's okay if you do that. The state of San Bernardino. Yeah.
The process of San Bernardino County succeeding is like years and years and years process.
Oh yeah, it would never happen. My 2 cents. It wouldn't, yeah. There is a huge, if you guys are interested, this is kind of a fun little story too. There's a whole movement right now for a 51st state, Northern California, Southeastern Oregon, and potentially Southwestern Idaho. The state of, anybody know the name of it? Jefferson, yeah, the state of Jefferson. This has been around for over 100 years. Still hasn't happened. Yeah. So, no, it's wonderful language. It's a nice little threat. But it's kind of like what should have happened to Alexander Hamilton. We argue we're going to duel and we shoot way past each other. So it's just a nice little threat. But it could potentially result in more funding for our county, which most of us would enjoy and benefit from, potentially. All right, 2 left, the 2 city ones. Anybody doing any research on your city propositions? Yeah, a couple of you, good, all right. So you've got 2 of them. Number 1 is Measure F, and it is by far the most complicated one. So a yes vote supports making changes to the process for conducting socioeconomic impact analysis for residential projects. What does that mean? You may recall that several years ago, we voted for something called Proposition U in the city of Redlands. Proposition U was attempting to limit how much our city could grow, how many different building types we could put up, the heights of the buildings that we could put up. We built a new general plan for the city of Redlands based on that, and then times change. And so the city is feeling limited by Measure U. So they're trying to ask, or they're not trying, they are asking us to consider some changes to it. Now, I wish I could say it's one change, this change, that change. It is a plethora of changes depending on what part of the city you're looking at. So in keeping it as simple as I can for you, if you believe that the city of Redlands needs to grow to be able to have more viable services and for the city to continue to thrive, then you would want to support Measure Measure F. J we're coming to. Measure F. If you believe that our city is expanding too much, we're growing too big, that we aren't able to sustain what we have as a result of that, you would not want to support Measure F. In its simplest terms, that's where we would go. Now, we can go into a lot more detail. I've got other handouts for me to refer to if you would like, but I don't want to overbear you with some of this if not. That is correct. So, yeah, 68 feet is what Measure U, I believe, had put in place, but it's a universal. Measure F would change it, that some would be limited to 54 feet, some would still be able to go up to 68 feet, and it just depends on where you are talking about in the city. And that's where, without getting maps and everything, I didn't want to go that far with it, but that's where you're at with it. You're correct. The heights are one of the biggies. Correct. So obviously, as the horns have told us, the train is coming, and that means development with it, as it historically has meant in our nation's history. And so that's part of the changes that's coming with it. Again, Measure U never was passed with an ability to see where our city would be today. And that's where, again, to keep it as simple as we can, that's the root of this. Do we want to continue to expand and change and grow? Measure F is saying, yes, we need to do that. There's a lot of folks in tradition of Redlands saying, we've already done enough of that changing. It's not been a good change. Let's stop it. And that would mean a no vote on it. Yeah. Go ahead.
There are also some protections. It was a compromise thing from the one that was originally pulled off.
Correct. If you want, and I can give you some numbers, you can actually go onto the city's website and they have these pieces up there in a PDF that you can read through. What Measure F would change is 5 different parts of our general plan. 1A.0, 1A.01, 10, 1A30, 42B, and 44LJ. Now what that means, and I'll read you a couple of the bullets, so if you want to follow with me, you can. If you're already kind of making up your mind, that's okay too. Take a little nap. I'll wake you up for Measure J in a moment. What Measure F is going to do is it's going to give us 7 ideas. The Redlands General Plan provides that socioeconomic studies be prepared for most development projects. Measure F amends the socioeconomic impact analysis for residential projects to provide that the cost portion of the study be determined by a mathematical formula which considers the city's budgeted expenditures, the city's population, and the projected population of the proposed project. Clear as mud. That is one piece of it. Second part is the development fee policy and the socioeconomic cost benefit study would not apply to any development that is located within the University Street Transit Village. Are you guys familiar with the University Street Transit Village idea? Development over by the University of Redlands off of Grove that the U of R has asked for a major development there. And that's really the heart of where a lot of the pro and con came in at. The University of Redlands is proposing a massive apartment complex, shopping complex, taking advantage of the train coming through in that area, as well as opening the door for some other developments further down along the train to the west. The Redlands General Plan prohibits the establishment of new residential land use classifications by the City Council, except Measure F exempts the Transit Village Overlay Zone, which would be part of the U of R proposal. New construction of single-family homes on existing lots bound by developed property as of March 2020 are exempt from Measure U. The Redlands General Plan exempts from Measure U development directly related to Metrolink stations, and Measure F would eliminate that exception. The Redlands General Plan exempts from Measure U properties proposed within the city's downtown specific plan 45. Measure F eliminates that. And parcels identified as resource preservation located in San Mateo Canyon west of the southeast area which are zoned agriculture cannot be rezoned unless approved by the voters. And then finally, Measure F adds the following provisions to the general plan. The limit of building heights within the downtown transit village and the University Street Transit Village are 3 stories or 43 feet in height, except, and then there's a number of exceptions that are there as well. So again, it's somewhat complicated. If you are interested in that, I'll be happy to stay after. I'll share these if you want to take some pictures of them so you can study it later, or I can show you where on the website you can get this from the City of Redlands as well. I just didn't have any way to summarize this succinctly other than as I did at the beginning, which is that, again, there's a continued fight that's been going on as long as I've lived in Redlands, which is the development of the city. How much do we want to develop or not develop? And this is definitely a push saying our city needs to change, needs to modernize, needs to develop. And so this would set aside, and if you remember Measure U, it was a huge fight in the city for, this would set aside some of those provisions to allow for that future expansion, growth, building. And some folks obviously love that idea and think it would be good for our city economically. And some folks believe it would be very bad, not only economically, but commercially and culturally for our city. And that's the heart of Measure F. I'll ask. Any questions? How am I voting? Usually a pen. I don't like to vote in pencil because I don't trust anybody. My wife comes behind me and changes all my votes. All right. Measure. Oh yeah, good. Measure J. Measure J is a lot simpler. Measure J is asking that we increase the business license tax. The current rate is 0.047, 4 7/10 of a cent per gross square foot. The new rate would go up to 0.105. And this would only be applied to distribution centers within the city of Redlands. This is not applying to any other business except distribution centers. It is anticipated that this will raise an additional $530,000 in revenue for the city. It is until it's ended by voters. So this one stays in place until we, the voters, choose to change it again, if we choose to change it. And the basic idea is that when we set up this tax rate, I think it said in here what year it was, we had, I think it was 2010 range, we had almost no distribution centers in Redlands. So we set up this tax rate. It was fair for the folks downtown. It was fair for our businesses, Mervyn's for back in the day. Everyone was okay with that. And now we've got these distribution centers which take up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of square feet, but the number of jobs they create is not proportional to the amount of space that they take. And so the city's simply saying, we want to raise up our tax rate for them to be more commensurate with the services that we as a city have to provide in order to have those businesses here. Isn't that one much simpler than Measure F? So if you want the tax rate to go up for distribution centers, a yes vote on J. If you don't want the distribution centers to pay a higher tax than anyone else pays, a no vote on Measure J. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers, but do you know what the percent increase is?
No, I didn't do the math off the top of my head, but it's definitely a more than 100% increase because we're going from 047 to 105. But it doesn't, I didn't do the math and it doesn't say it here for me. So if someone's quicker, Mr. Berkumpus only taught me English skills. Oh no, Mr. Vanderkoy taught me math skills. Mr. Vanderkoy attempted to teach me math skills, but I was a very stubborn student, so sorry. So I'll trust you to take out an abacus or an iPhone or something in between and calculate that one. Somebody got me already. I've been buying you time. No one's doing the math for me. Thank you, sir. Man, all right, I'll pay for dinner next time. 120% increase. 120% increase. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm just going to ask, would that possibly force a business to leave the warehouse?
Obviously, first answer, I have no clue. Second answer, I would say is that if a business was already planning to come in, I'm sure they're going to stay coming in. I don't know, and I should have. That's a great question in the sense of what is the tax rate in the other areas? That would probably determine that answer a whole lot more. And I would dare guess that San Bernardino's funding, they would have been increasing theirs. And it's one of those things, kind of like teacher salaries. Once one district raises, everyone else has to kind of catch up. I would dare guess we are either catching up with others or other cities are going, go Redlands, because if we raise ours, they'll raise theirs. Yeah, John Smith's economic laws are still pretty valid. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, if that's it, there's no other questions, you now know how to vote. All right. Any wrap-up?
No, thank you, James, so much for your willingness to put the effort and energy into this. We are grateful for the education that you have provided for us. I know, knowing James, he probably has no problem with you spending time asking a question or two tonight.
Yep.
Or an email question. His email, if you're looking for more clarity, is
Terrier James, because I teach for the Terriers, terrierjames@gmail.com.